For 3 years, a truly horrific crime spree was unfolding right in plain sight across Houston, Texas. It's a story about manipulation, about absolute terror, and about dozens of missing boys whose parents' pleas were just tragically ignored. We're going to dive into how this nightmare finally came to a violent end and how one of America's most prolific serial killers was at last unmasked.
So, picture this. It's a hot, sticky summer evening in a pretty rundown Houston neighborhood. A couple of detectives, they're acting on a really shocking confession from a 17-year-old kid. And they pull up to this collection of steel sheds at a place called Southwest Boat Storage. They're looking for answers, sure, but they have absolutely no idea what they're about to find. Right away, there's a problem. The owner of the place, he doesn't have a key. See, the renters, they all use their own locks. So with permission, the detectives get out the bolt cutters and snap the padlock. As they pull open those doors, they are literally stepping into a secret that is going to haunt the city of Houston for decades. The teenager who led them there, a kid named Elmer Wayne Henley. He takes just one step inside the shed, and his face, it just turns white. He staggers back out, totally shaken, and in that moment, the detectives know. They know something truly terrible is waiting for them in the dark. Peering inside, at first, it just looks like junk, Empty boxes, some old tools, a half-stripped car. But then their eyes adjust and they start to notice more sinister things. 2 10-pound sacks of lime, often used to make bodies decompose faster. And then a small yellow bicycle. A quick radio check confirms their worst fears. That bike belonged to 13-year-old James Stramella. He'd vanished just 5 days earlier. The detectives, they bring in some local inmates to start digging into the shed's dirt floor. And within minutes, under a layer of that lime, they find a body. And then another. And then another. By the time the gruesome work in this single shed was finally over, they had unearthed a total of 17 bodies. This mass grave, this was the final, awful, secret chapter in a 3-year reign of terror. And it was all orchestrated by one man. A man who, to the entire world, was just a friendly, respectable local businessman. Meet Dean Corll. To the neighborhood kids, he was known as the Candyman. He ran his family's candy business, and he used it to build this really wholesome reputation. He was that friendly guy, handing out free sweets near the schools, kind of like a neighborhood Willy Wonka, but one who was hiding an absolutely monstrous secret. And Corll was methodical about it. He didn't just hand out candy. No, he installed a pool table in his factory. He gave boys joyrides on his motorcycle. He threw these big parties. These are classic grooming tactics. He created this world where teenagers felt welcome and safe, all while driving a windowless white van that, in a more naive time, just didn't set off the same alarm bells it would today. But here's where this story gets even more chilling. Corll wasn't hunting alone. He preyed on vulnerable teenagers and he twisted them into becoming his accomplices, the ones who would help him find new victims. His 2 main helpers were David Brooks, who Corll started grooming when he was just 12 years old, and Elmer Wayne Henley, who he recruited at 15. And it was actually Brooks who first introduced Henley to Corll, which set in motion this deadly partnership that would end, ironically, with Corll's own death. So you have to wonder, why on earth would they help him? While this quote from Henley pretty much explains the whole insidious method of control. He was first drawn in by an offer of $200 for every boy he could lure. I mean, that's a huge amount of money for a teenager trying to support his family. But after that first murder, Corll trapped him. He used threats, convincing Henley he was already an accomplice and had no way out. And that, of course, brings us to the staggering human cost of all of this. Because while Corll and his accomplices were plotting, dozens of families were living through an unimaginable nightmare. Officially, authorities have confirmed at least 29 victims. But here's the thing. Even Corll's own accomplices believe he killed many, many more. And because other suspected burial sites were just never excavated, the real number of boys he murdered, well, we'll likely never know. And these weren't just numbers. They were all boys and young men, mostly from Houston's Heights neighborhood, aged anywhere from 13 to 20. They were last seen, walking to a bowling alley, riding a bike, heading to a swimming pool. They were just kids living their lives until they happened to cross paths with the Candyman. The depth of this tragedy is it's hard to wrap your head around.
The Waldrop family and the Balch family, both of them lost not one but two of their sons to Dean Corll.
Now, what's really infuriating about all this is that as these boys kept disappearing, their frantic parents were told again and again by the police that their sons were probably just runaways. It was a really common assumption back in the 70s. Before we had centralized databases, a teenager leaving home was often just seen as teenage rebellion, not a sign of foul play. And this dismissal, this complete lack of investigation, it allowed Corll's killing spree to continue, completely unchecked, for 3 long years. But on that same night, August 8th, 1973, as detectives were just beginning to break into that boat shed, the horror was finally coming to a bloody and completely unexpected end across town. So after a night of drinking and huffing paint, Corll suddenly turned on his own accomplice, Elmer Wayne Henley. He tied up Henley and 2 of his friends and flat out declared he was going to kill them all. But Corll made one final fatal mistake. He set his pistol down. Henley grabbed it, and using the shooting skills that Corll himself had taught him, he shot his tormentor dead. After killing Corll, Henley could have tried to paint himself as a hero, right? Instead, he walked right into a police station and confessed to everything. He said he wanted the families to be able to find their sons. And his confession is what led police to the boat shed and other burial sites, and it's what led to convictions for both him and David Brooks. But even today, at least one victim remains unidentified, and many people fear that the full, awful truth of Corll's crimes is buried forever. And that is the final, haunting question of the Candyman case. With some of the suspected burial sites now submerged underwater, and with police investigations that were, at the time, just tragically incompetent, we're all left to wonder just how many more boys vanished into Dean Corll's darkness, their stories never, ever to be told.